Little Saturday action here for you. I'm talking about Michigan at Indiana, Saturday, October 8th, and that'll be a 12 o'clock Eastern kickoff. Michigan is minus 21, total 57.5. Now, the Wolverines have been pretty dominant this year. They got a 5-0 record, 45 points a game they're averaging on offense. Running back Blake Corum, he's running for over 120 yards a game, and he scored 10 times on the ground. Meanwhile, defensively, the Wolverines are allowing only 11 points a game. They're facing an Indiana squad who's done little to establish the run. They're 115th in rushing offense, and they failed to cover the point spread in their last 4 straight. Now, defensively, they've been pretty much a nightmare defending the pass. They're 109th in the country in total yards allowed. And when it comes to scoring, Michigan's gone 4-1 to the under thus far in the season. I'm going to lean toward the Wolverines minus 21 and the under 57.5. Next matchup, it is going to be Tennessee at LSU, 12 o'clock Eastern kickoff. Tennessee's minus 3, total 61.5. Now, Tennessee's given opposing defenses fits this year. They're scoring 49 points a game, and they're leading the country in total yards. Hendon Hooker is completing 72% of his passes, and he's thrown 8 touchdowns, no picks. Now, these Tennessee receivers are also averaging over 15 yards per reception. They're facing an LSU team who failed to cover against the likes of Auburn and Florida State thus far, and even though they've been running the ball quite well, they're actually going up against a top 20 rush defense in Tennessee. And when it comes to the number, the Vols saw their last 2 straight get over the total, 4-1 to the over in their last 5. I'm going to lean toward Tennessee minus 3, over 61.5. Next ball game, it is going to be TCU at Kansas, 12 o'clock East. TCU's minus 6.5, total 67.5. Now the Horned Frogs are 4-0 in the year, and they covered the point spread in all of those victories. They're actually right behind Tennessee in total yards a game on offense in the country. Kendre Miller and Imari DeMarcado, they've combined for over 140 yards a game rushing. Meanwhile, quarterback Max Duggan, he's thrown 11 touchdowns, 0 picks. Now, they're facing a Kansas defense who's had a tough time slowing down the pass. They're 107th in pass defense this year. And when it comes to offensive production, well, they really haven't thrown it all that much either. They're 105th in passing yards per game. Now, when it comes to total, Kansas saw 3 out of their last 5 get over the number. Meanwhile, TCU went 3-0 to the over in their last 3 themselves. I'm going to lean toward TCU minus 6.5, over 67.5. Next ball game, it is going to be Arkansas taking on Mississippi State. And that's going to be a 12 o'clock Eastern kickoff. A lot of big slurp there, big gulp. Cafe Bustelo, can't beat it. Make you crap yourself 5 times a day and give you anxiety. Only cocaine can rival. But anyway, next matchup, Arkansas, Mississippi State, 12 o'clock East. Mississippi State's minus 6.5, total 62. Now, the Bulldogs are 4-1 on the year, 4-1 against the number during that stretch. They're coming fresh off a 42-point performance against Texas A&M this past Saturday. They're also in the top 10 in the country in passing. Will Rogers is completing 73% of his passes, and he's thrown 19 touchdowns already. Rogers is currently throwing for over 340 yards a game. Meanwhile, defensively, the Bulldogs currently have double-digit takeaways. They're taking on an Arkansas squad who's on a 2-game skid themselves, and they failed to cover in their last 3 straight. This Razorback D has really let these guys down this year. They're giving up 31 points a game, and they rank 124th in pass defense. Now, total-wise, Arkansas is 4-1 to the over for the entire season. Meanwhile, Mississippi State saw their last 2 straight get over the total. I'm going to lean toward Mississippi State minus 6.5, over 62. Next matchup, it is going to be Mizzou taking on Florida. That's going to be a 12 o'clock Eastern start time. Florida's minus 10.5, total 56 and a hook. And even though the Gators have a little issue moving the sticks, they've struggled on the defensive side of the ball. They're allowing over 200 yards a game on the ground, and they're 111th in total yards allowed. They're facing a Missouri team who covered the number in their last 2 straight covers against the likes of Georgia and Auburn. Jalen Carleys and Tyron Hopper, they've combined for 65 tackles between the two of them. When it comes to the scoring in this one, Missouri's going 4-0 to the under in their last 4 straight. Meanwhile, Florida saw 2 out of their last 4 fall under the total. I'm going to lean toward Mizzou plus 10.5, under 56 and a hook. Next ball game, Texas at Oklahoma, 12 o'clock Eastern start time. The Texas Longhorns are minus 6.5 on the road, total 65 and a hook. Now, it looks like OU's Dylan Gabriel, he's still in rough shape to play Saturday, so we'll have to keep an eye on him. Took a nasty shot Saturday and a big loss to TCU. I don't think he's going to play Saturday. Of course, defensively, they just haven't played good enough to keep themselves in ball games. OU's allowed 96 total points in their last 2 outings. Now, they're facing a Texas team who won 2 out of their last 3, and they've done a pretty nice job covering the number this year. These guys are 4-1 against the spread for the season. They've had little issue scoring points. The Longhorns scored 34 points or more in their last 3 straight. Running back Bijan Robinson, he scored 8 times on the ground. He's averaging over 100 yards a game. Now, total-wise, I think Oklahoma is going to have issues scoring if they go with their backup. They also saw 3 out of their last 5 fall under the line. Meanwhile, Texas is 3-2 to the under this year themselves. I'm going to lean toward the Longhorns. Is that it? Is that how do they do it? I think it's that. I think that's what they do. The Longhorns, minus 6.5, and the under 65 and a hook. Next game, little Big Ten action. I'm talking about Purdue squaring off against Maryland, 12 o'clock Eastern start time. Maryland is minus 4, total 61. And even though the Terps have looked real good this year, they're going to have to watch out for this Purdue passing attack. Maryland's already 97th in the country in pass defense. They also have to face Aiden O'Connell for Purdue, and he can definitely sling it. His favorite target's been Charlie Jones, who's caught 7 touchdown passes and averages over 115 yards a game. Now, defensively, don't sleep on this Boilermaker D. They're in the top 30 in the country in fewest yards. Deliver the goods, Brock. They're in the top 30 in the country in fewest yards allowed. Now, total-wise, Purdue saw their last 2 straight fall under the number. Meanwhile, Maryland's 4-1 to the under in their last 5. I'm going to lean toward Purdue plus 4, under 61. All right, next ball game. Louisville taking on Virginia, 12 o'clock Eastern start time. Louisville's minus 4.5, totals 51. The Cards have been tough to slow down on the ground. They're in the top 25 in rushing. And they're led by quarterback Malik Cunningham, who's averaging over 6 yards a carry. Now, Cunningham's also scored 9 touchdowns on the ground. They're facing a Virginia squad who lost their last 2 straight. And they have trouble covering the spread. They're just 1-4 against the spread overall for the season. The Cavaliers are also having a tough time getting on the scoreboard. They're averaging only 18 points a game for the entire year. When it comes to the number, Virginia's gone 5-0 to the under this year. Meanwhile, Louisville saw 3 out of their last 5 stay under the total themselves. I'm going to lean toward Louisville, minus 4.5, under 51. Next game, little MAC conference action. I'm talking about Eastern Michigan taking on Western Michigan, 12 o'clock Eastern kickoff. Now, the Western Michigan Broncos are minus 4, totals 58. And for a team laying 4 points in this spot here, Western Michigan hasn't been very good offensively. They're throwing for only 175 yards a game. They're also 120th in total yards per contest. They're facing an Eastern Michigan squad who won 2 out of their last 3 themselves, and they do a pretty nice job of running the football. Samson Evans is gaining over 105 yards a game on the ground. He's also averaging just about 6 yards a carry. Meanwhile, defensively, Chase Klein, he has 47 big tackles. Now, total-wise, 2 out of the Eagles' last 3 stayed under the number. Western Michigan saw their last 2 straight fall under the line. Give me Eastern Michigan +4, under 58. Next ball game, probably not on our big screen. Some more MAC conference action. It is going to be Buffalo taking on Bowling Green, 12 o'clock East. Bowling Green's -2, total 55. The Falcons of Bowling Green, they covered in 2 out of their last 3. Covers against Mississippi State and Marshall. Actually, that Marshall game was an upset win, a straight-up victory. Right? I believe so. But anyway, they did cover, and offensively, Bowling Green's averaging just about 31 points a game. Now, they're facing a Buffalo D who gives up a whole lot of yards a game on the ground. They're also 107th in total yards allowed per contest. They've given up 31 points or more in all of their games except one. Comes to the total, 3 out of Buffalo's last 4 did get over the number. Meanwhile, BG's 5-0 to the over for the whole year. Give me Bowling Green -2, over 55. Next game, some more MACtion. Akron, Ohio, 2 o'clock East. Ohio's 11.5, total 59. The Bobcats dropped 3 out of their last 4. They covered the number only once during that span. Ohio's also played some pretty bad defense. They're allowing more passing yards a game than any other team in the country. They're facing an Akron team on the other side who did cover in their last 2 straight themselves. Covers over the likes of Bowling Green and Liberty. Now, the Zips have thrown only 2 interceptions this year, and they have a couple of really good receivers. Shockey Jock Louis and Daniel George. That's right, Shockey Jock Louis, that's one guy. Him and Daniel George, they're getting over 120 yards a game receiving between the 2 of them. Now, total-wise, I'm not sure we're going to see a whole lot of defense in this one. Akron saw 2 out of their last 3 get over the number. Ohio's 4-1 to the over in their last 5. Give me Akron +11.5, over 59. Next ball game, Georgia Southern taking on Georgia State, 2 o'clock East. Georgia State's -2.5 at home, total 65 and a hook. And even though Georgia State can really run the football offensively, they've had a tough time on the other side of the football. These guys are allowing over 33 points a game, and they're 114th in total yards allowed. They're facing a Georgia Southern offense who really loves to throw it around. Kyle Van Treese, he's averaging over 300 yards a game passing. And he has a couple of really good receivers. Derwin Burgess and Caleb Hood, they're averaging nearly 150 yards a game between the 2 of them. The Georgia Southern Panthers have also been really good covering the point spread. These guys are 4-1 ATS overall for the year. And when it comes to the number, the Panthers saw 2 out of their last 4 get over the line, throwing out that Coastal game. Meanwhile, Georgia State saw 2 out of their last 3 get over the total themselves. I'm going to lean toward Georgia Southern +2.5, over 65 and a hook. Next matchup, it is going to be USF taking on Cincinnati, 2:30 p.m. East. The Cincinnati Bearcats are -27.5, totals 59. Now, Cincy's on a 4-game winning streak, and they covered the point spread 3 times during that span. They've also scored a whole lot of points during that span. The Bearcats are averaging over 44 points a game since their loss against Arkansas. Now, the Bearcats are also in the top 25 in passing. They have 2 really good running backs. Charles McClellan and Corey Kiner, they're averaging over 115 yards a game on the ground. I think that's between the 2 of them. They're facing a USF team who lost their last 3 straight, and they allowed 40 points a game during that span. Matter of fact, the Bulls are 127th in the country in total yards allowed. That's bottom 5 in the country in total yards allowed per game. Now, when it comes to the numbers, Cincy could very well put this one over themselves. They're also 4-1 to the over thus far in the season. Meanwhile, USF, they are 4-1 to the over themselves. I'm going to lean towards Cincinnati, minus 27.5, over 59. Next matchup should be a good one. I'm talking about Auburn taking on Georgia, 3:30 p.m. East. Georgia's minus 29.5, totals 50. Now, the undefeated Bulldogs are allowing just 10 points a game and under 90 yards a game rushing. Jamon Jumas Johnson has 24 tackles on the year, along with a couple of sacks. Meanwhile, Malachi Starks has 23 tackles, along with a couple of picks. Now, they're taking on an Auburn squad who failed to cover in 4 out of their last 5 ball games. Meanwhile, offensively, the Tigers are having all kinds of problems. Definitely having problems getting on the scoreboard. These guys have averaged only 15 points a game in their last 3 outings. And when it comes to the total, 3 out of Auburn's last 4 stayed under the number. Meanwhile, Georgia's 5-0 to the under thus far in the year. I'm going to lean toward the Georgia Bulldogs, minus 29.5, under 50. Next game, Texas Tech taking on Oklahoma State, 3:30 p.m. East. Oklahoma State's minus 10, total 63.5. Now, the Cowboys are scoring a staggering 48 points a game, and they're in the top 15 in passing. Braden Johnson and Brennan Presley, they're averaging over 120 yards a game between the two of them. They're facing a Texas Tech team on the other side of things who failed to cover in 3 out of their last 4. And they gave up 32 points a game during that span. They also suffered outright losses to Kansas State and NC State during that time frame. And even though the Raiders continue to throw it all over the yard, they've done very little to establish a run game. They're actually 111th in the country in offensive rushing. Now, when it comes to the total, Texas Tech is 4-1 to the over thus far in the season. Meanwhile, Oklahoma State saw 3 out of their last 4 get over the line. I'm going to lean toward Oklahoma State minus 10, over 63.5. Next matchup, it is going to be Utah taking on UCLA, 3:30 p.m. East. Utah is minus 4 on the road, total 64.5. And even though Utah looks great right now, just keep in mind they've beaten up on teams like Southern Utah, San Diego State, and Arizona State. They're facing a UCLA team who's pretty much hitting on all cylinders right now. They're 5-0 in the year and just hung up 40 on Washington. The Bruins are scoring over 41 points a game, and they're in the top 10 in total yards. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, he's thrown 11 touchdowns and just 1 interception. Meanwhile, running back Zach Charbonnet, he's averaging over 6 yards a carry. Now, when it comes to defensive play, pretty much nobody can run on the Bruins right now. They're relying only 85 yards a game on the ground. I'm going to lean toward UCLA plus 4, under 64.5. All right, next matchup should be a doozy. Liberty taking on UMass, 3:30 p.m. East. Liberty's minus 24.5, totals 51 points. Now, the Liberty Flames got the W in 3 out of their last 4. And they failed to cover only once during that span. The Flames are doing a real nice job of running the football again this year. These guys are rushing for nearly 200 yards a game. Running back Day Hunter, he scored 6 total touchdowns. And he averages nearly 6.5 yards per carry. They're facing a UMass team who lost 4 of 5 to start the year. And they're literally no threat throwing the football. The Minutemen of UMass, they're throwing for just 67 yards a game through the air. They're also averaging only 10 points a game. Now, total-wise, UMass is 4-1 to the under. Meanwhile, Liberty saw 2 out of their last 3 stay under the total themselves, throwing out that ODU game. Give me Liberty minus 24.5, under 51 in that tight window. Next matchup I have for you, it is going to be Wisconsin at Northwestern, 3:30 p.m. East. Wisconsin's minus 9.5, totals 43. And not only is Ryan Field a tough place to play because it's like basically playing at a high school facility, but the Badgers of Wisconsin, they lost 3 out of their last 4. That includes a 24-point loss to Illinois this past Saturday. And if you throw out that New Mexico State game, Wisconsin has averaged only 15 points per contest in their last 3 outings. Now they're facing a tough Northwestern defense who allowed just 17 points in their last 2 outings respectively. Meanwhile, offensively, the Wildcats are having some pretty good success throwing the football. They're in the top 30 in the country in passing. Running back Evan Hull, he has over 750 total yards, both rushing and receiving, and he's scored 4 times. When it comes to the number, the Cats are 4-0 to the under in their last 4 straight. Meanwhile, Wisconsin saw 2 out of their last 4 fall under the line, throwing out that Illinois game. I'm going to lean toward Northwestern plus 9.5, under 43. Next ball game, it is going to be Virginia Tech taking on Pitt, 3:30 Eastern start time. The Pitt Panthers are minus 14, totals 42.5. And even though the Panthers got shocked by Georgia Tech this past Saturday, I think Pitt should be able to bounce back. They're averaging 33 points a game offensively. Meanwhile, on the other side of the football, defensively, Pitt's limiting their opponents to just 198 yards a game passing. Servosha Dennis has 35 tackles and 3 sacks. Meanwhile, Brandon Hill's right behind him with 32 tackles on the season. They're facing a Virginia Tech squad who failed to cover in their last 3 straight, and they've had all kinds of problems this year moving the chains. Virginia Tech is currently 110th in college football in total yards per game. That puts them in the bottom 25 in the country in that category. Now, they've actually been held to just 11 points a game in their 3 losses this season. When it comes to the number, the Hokies are 5-0 to the under for the year. I'm going to lean toward Pitt, minus 14, under 42.5. Next game, ECU, Tulane, 3:30 p.m. East. Tulane's minus 2.5, totals 54. You heading out?
Yep.
All right, I'm taking a 5-minute break. I'll be back. All right, guys, thanks for the break. Really appreciate it. A little less than 5 minutes. All right, moving on. ECU, Tulane, 3:30 p.m. East. Whew. Tulane minus 2.5, total 54. Tulane's gone 4-1 against the spread this year, and they're playing some really tough defense. They're allowing only 14 points a game, and they have the number one pass defense in the country right now. Dorian Williams and Nick Anderson, they've combined for over 65 tackles between the two of them. They're taking on an ECU team who looks pretty good themselves, but did suffer a loss to Navy just a few weeks ago. The Pirates are also 81st in the country in pass defense. Now, total-wise, ECU saw games against Navy and NC State stay under the number. Meanwhile, Tulane is 4-1 to the under thus far in the year. I'm going to lean toward Tulane minus 2.5, under 54. Next matchup, Tulsa, Navy, 3:30 p.m. East. Tulsa's minus 5, total 46.5. Now, the Golden Hurricane covered in their last 3 straight. Covers against the likes of Cincinnati, Ole Miss, and Jacksonville State. They've also done a terrific job throwing the football. They're in the top 10 in passing yards per game. Keelan Stokes has caught 37 balls for 613 and 3 scores. He's averaging over 120 yards a game receiving. They're facing a Navy defense who's had a real tough time slowing down the pass. They're 101st in pass defense, and they've lost 3 of 4 to start the year. Meanwhile, offensively, the midshipmen are putting up just 13 points a game. Now, total-wise, Navy's 3-1 to the under. Meanwhile, Tulsa saw their last 2 straight fall under the line. I'm going to lean toward Tulsa minus 5, under 46.5. Next game, little Maction. Ball State, Central Michigan, 3:30 p.m. East. The Central Michigan Chippewas are minus 8.5, total 63. Now, Central Michigan is just 1-4 in this season. They failed to cover against the likes of Toledo, Bucknell, and South Alabama. The Chippewas have also had a tough time defending the pass. They're 108th in the nation in pass defense, which actually puts them in the bottom 25 in the country in that category. They're taking on a Ball State team who throws it for just over 305 yards a game themselves. Ja'Shawn Jackson and Yo Hines Taylor, they're combining for nearly 150 yards a game between the two of them. And I can guarantee you that that is the only guy in the world named Yo Hines. Unless he named his son that. And maybe his dad's name is that. 3 guys tops with the name Yo Hines. Total-wise, 3 out of Ball State's last 5 got over the line. Meanwhile, Central Michigan saw 2 out of their last 4 get over the number, throwing out that Toledo game. I'm going to lean toward Ball State, plus 8.5, over 63. Next game, Toledo, Northern Illinois, 3:30 p.m. East. Toledo's minus 5.5, total 58 and a hook. Now, the Rockets are playing some pretty good pass defense. They actually have a top 25 pass defense in the country. Dallas Gant has a team best 41 tackles. Meanwhile, Deontay Johnson's right behind him with 31 tackles on the year. They're facing an NIU team who really doesn't throw it all too well themselves. These guys are 95th in the country in team passing. Meanwhile, on the other side of the football, defensively, the Huskies are giving up nearly 450 total yards a game. Now, when it comes to scoring, NIU's 5-0 to the over to start the year. Meanwhile, Toledo saw 2 out of their last 3 get over the total, throwing out that Central Michigan game. Give me Toledo minus 5.5, over 58 and a hook. Next ball game, Kent State taking on Miami, Ohio, 3:30 p.m. East. Kent State's minus 5.5, totals 59. And even though Kent State's favored by 5.5 on the road, it ain't because of their defense. These guys are 119th in the country in total yards allowed. It's going to put them in the bottom 15 in that category. They're facing a Miami squad who covered in 2 out of their last 3. That includes an outright victory over Northwestern. Now, this Red Hawk D has been solid. They're allowing only 85 yards a game on the ground. Ryan McWood and Matthew Salpick have combined for over 80 tackles between the two of them. When it comes to the total, Miami's gone 4-1 to the under in their last 5. Meanwhile, Kent State's 3-1 to the under in their last 4. Give me Miami, Ohio, plus 5.5, under 59. Next matchup, Middle Tennessee State taking on UAB, 3:30 Eastern start time. UAB's minus 9.5, total 56. Now, the Blazers have been nearly impossible to throw against. They're giving up just 17 points a game, and they rank in the top 15 in the country in pass defense. Meanwhile, offensively, UAB's done a real nice job running the football. Dwayne McBride, he's rushing for over 130 yards a game, and he scored 6 times through 4 contests. They're facing a Middle Tennessee team who allows just about 40 total yards a game. They're facing a Middle Tennessee team who's allowing just about 400 total yards a game. Meanwhile, offensively, they're in the bottom 30 in the country in defending the run. Now, total-wise, Middle Tennessee saw their last 3 straight get over the number. I'm going to lean toward UAB, minus 9.5, over 56. Next game, Ohio State, Michigan State, 4 o'clock East. Ohio State's minus 25.5, total 61. Now, the undefeated Buckeyes covered in their last 3 straight. They're also scoring more points per contest than any other team in the nation. C.J. Stroud's thrown for 18 touchdowns and only 2 interceptions. Meanwhile, wideout Emeka Egbuka is averaging over 100 yards a game receiving. Now, defensively, this secondary is not only, they're just not going to let you catch many passes. They're limiting their opponents to under 155 yards a game through the air. They're taking on a Michigan State team who's on a 3-game skid, and they failed to cover in all 3 of those ball games. Now, defensively, Sparty's had a tough time with throwing against teams. They've had a tough time with throwing teams defensively. They're 115th in the country in pass defense. That's bottom 20 in college football in that category. Now, total-wise, Ohio State saw their last 3 straight all get over the number. I'm going to lean toward the Buckeyes, minus 25.5, over 61. Next matchup, it is going to be Ole Miss taking on Vanderbilt, 4 o'clock East. Ole Miss is minus 18.5, total 60. Now, the undefeated Rebels have done an incredible job on defense. They're allowing only 11 points a game, and they rank in the top 30 in fewest yards allowed. Meanwhile, offensively, not many teams are running it better than Ole Miss. They're in the top 5 in rushing, and they're led by Quinshawn Judkins, who scored 6 times and averages over 100 yards a game. They're facing a Vandy team who's struggled on defense this year themselves. They've allowed 31 points or more in their last 4 straight. They're also in the bottom 10 in the country in defensive yards allowed. Now, total-wise, Vandy's gone 4-1 to the over. Meanwhile, Ole Miss could very well put this one over themselves. I'm going to lean toward Ole Miss, minus 18.5, over 60. Next ball game, little Pac-12 action. I'm talking about Washington at Arizona State, 4 o'clock Eastern start time. Washington's minus 14, totals 57.5. And as bad as this Washington defense looked against USC last week, the Huskies should be able to outscore Arizona State this weekend. They're averaging 42 points a game, and they rank in the top 3 in the country in throwing. Michael Penix, he's averaging nearly 350 yards a game passing, and he's thrown 16 touchdowns. Meanwhile, wideouts Jalen McMillan and Rome Odunze, they've combined for 8 receiving touchdowns. Now, they're facing an ASU defense who's ranked 91st in total yards allowed. Meanwhile, offensively, they're in the bottom 30 in the nation in yards gained per contest. Now, total-wise, Washington's 5-0 to the over to start the year. I'm going to lean toward Washington, minus 14, over 57.5. Next matchup, it is going to be Duke, Georgia Tech, 4 o'clock Eastern start time. Duke's minus 2.5, totals 53. Now, the 4-1 Blue Devils are scoring 35 points a game. And they've done a nice job of running the football. They're averaging over 200 yards a game on the ground, and they've scored 14 rushing touchdowns. Meanwhile, defensively, on the other side of the ball, Duke's holding their opponents to just 19 points a game. Darius Joyner has 41 tackles on the season, along with an interception. Meanwhile, linebacker Shaka Hayward, he has 34 tackles and 6 PDs, or as they would say, I guess in college football, PBUs. Now, they're facing a Georgia Tech offense who throws for just 168 yards a game. They're actually in the bottom 20 of the nation in total yards per contest. Despite their upset win against Pitt, this GT defense is allowing nearly 200 yards a game on the ground. Total-wise, both schools are 4-1 to the under in their last 5. I'm going to lean toward Duke, -2.5, under 53. Next game, North Carolina taking on the Miami Hurricanes, 4 o'clock East. Miami's -3.5, total 66. Now, this Hurricane D has had a tough time slowing down the pass. These guys are 95th in the nation in pass defense. Meanwhile, as a team, the Canes are on a 2-game skid. They failed to cover in their last 3 straight. They're facing a UNC team who definitely scores with ease. They're averaging over 45 points a game, and they rank in the top 10 in the country in total yards. Drake May is averaging over 315 yards a game, and he's thrown for 19 touchdowns and just 1 pick. Now, total-wise, UNC saw 3 out of their last 5 get over the line. Meanwhile, Miami saw 2 out of their last 3 get over the total themselves, throwing out the Texas A&M game. I'm going to lean toward UNC +3.5, over 66. Next ball game, it is going to be Western Kentucky taking on UTSA, 6 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, Texas San Antonio, they are -6.5 at home, total 70. And even though they're the touchdown favorite, UTSA failed to cover in 2 out of their last 3. And they gave up a whole bunch of points in the process. Matter of fact, the Roadrunners are in the bottom 20 in college football in total yards allowed. They're also giving up 34 points a game for the entire year. They're going up against a Western Kentucky offense who loves to throw it around. Austin Reed's completing over 72% of his passes for over 330 yards a game. Meanwhile, as a team, the Hilltoppers are scoring over 43 points per contest. Now, total-wise, WKU's 5-0 to the over to start the year. Meanwhile, the Roadrunners of Texas San Antonio, they saw their last 3 straight get over the total. I'm going to lean toward Western Kentucky +6.5, over 70. Next ball game, Air Force, Utah State, 7 p.m. East. Air Force is -10.5, totals 56. Now, the 4-1 Falcons have played some really tough defense this season. These guys are allowing only 14 points a game, and they're in the top 10 in pass defense. Camby Goff, he has a pair of interceptions along with 19 tackles. Meanwhile, Alec Mock and Trey Taylor, they've combined for over 60 tackles between the two of them. Now, offensively, this is the most explosive rushing attack in the nation. The Falcons are rushing for nearly 400 yards a game on the ground. They're facing a Utah State defense who just can't stop the run to save their lives. These guys are in the bottom 25 in the country in rush defense. The Aggies are also allowing over 36 points a game. Now, total-wise, I don't think the Aggies can score enough to help put this one over. They have one of the worst offenses in the Mountain West. They're also 4-1 to the under for the entire year. I'm going to lean toward Air Force -10.5, under 56. Next ball game I have for you, it is going to be Wyoming at New Mexico, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Wyoming's -3, totals 36.5. And even though Wyo's the better team, I think they're going to have problems offensively. They're on a 2-game losing streak, and they're in the bottom 15 in total yards per game. They're also facing a New Mexico defense who's been relatively tough despite their record. These guys are allowing only 22 points a game, and they've actually done a real nice job stopping the run. Jarek Reed has 39 tackles, along with 9 PDs. When it comes to this pass rush, Cody Moon and Rico Hanna, they've combined for 6.5 sacks between the two of them. Now, total-wise, 3 out of New Mexico's last 4 did fall under the number, throwing out that UNLV game. Meanwhile, Wyoming on the other side, they saw 2 out of their last 4 fall under the total. I'm going to lean toward New Mexico +3, under 36.5. Next ball game I have for you, it is going to be James Madison taking on Arkansas State, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. JMU's -10.5 on the road, totals 56 and a hook. Now the Dukes should steamroll Arkansas State here. They're 4-0 on the season. They covered the number in all 4 wins. The Dukes are allowing just 217 total yards a game on defense, which actually ranks best in Division I. Taurus Jones leads the D with 25 tackles along with a pick. And speaking of interceptions, Jalen Walker has a pair of INTs, including a pick 6 from that linebacker spot. They're facing an Arkansas State team who's 88th in rushing. And as a team, the Red Wolves lost 3 out of their last 4. And they allowed 37 points a game during that span. Now, total-wise, Arkansas State saw 2 out of their last 3 get over the number. Meanwhile, JMU saw their last 3 straight get over the line. I'm going to lean toward James Madison, -10.5, over 56 and a hook. All right, guys, we're going to take another break. Be right back. Thanks for the break, guys. Really appreciate it. Might do one more before we're done here. Who knows? Might knock ourselves out. But anyway, next ball game. Appalachian State taking on Texas State. 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, Appy State's -19, totals 55 and a hook. Now, believe it or not, a lot of you guys aren't going to agree with me, but I actually don't think Appy State's all that much better than the Bobcats talent-wise. I just don't. And some would say, actually, the Mountaineers won't even have the best defense on the field in this game. Texas State is allowing only 192 yards a game passing, which puts them in the top 35 in the country in that category. Cordell Rogers has 4 interceptions from that secondary, including a pick 6. Levi Bell, he has 3.5 sacks along with 31 tackles. They're facing an Appalachian State team who failed to cover in 2 out of their last 3. As a matter of fact, they allowed 30 points a game on average in those failures to cover. And in their 2 straight-up losses this season, Mountaineers gave up 95 total points combined. So these guys are not bulletproof when it comes to their defense. They can be scored upon. Now, total-wise, Appy saw 2 out of their last 4 fall under the number. Meanwhile, Texas State went 3 under the under in their last 4. I'm going to lean toward Texas State plus 19, under 5.5, under 55.5. Next ball game, Southern Miss taking on Troy, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Troy's minus 6.5, totals 44. Now, Troy got the W in 3 out of their last 4, and they failed to cover only once during that span. The Trojans are also one of the best passing teams in the country. They're throwing for over 330 yards per contest. Meanwhile, wideouts Jaber Parker and Tez Johnson, they're averaging over 125 yards receiving a game between the two of them. When it comes to defensive play, the Trojans are allowing only 22 points per contest. They're facing a Southern Miss offense who really doesn't move the ball all too efficiently. They're in the bottom 35 in the nation in total yards. Meanwhile, defensively, the Eagles are they're 89th in the country in slowing down the run. Now, total-wise, both schools went 3-1 to the over in their last 4. I'm going to lean toward Troy, minus 6.5, over 44. Next game, Uconn, Florida International, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Uconn's the 5.5-point favorite on the road. Total's 46 and a hook. But as bad as Florida International is, Uconn is not the type of team that should be laying points against anyone, let alone on the road. They had a fluke win over Fresno State Saturday in the slop. They're also averaging just 15 points a game. They've been zero threat throwing the football. They're throwing for just 98 yards a game this year. They're facing an FIU defense who's actually amongst the best in the conference in defending the run. The Panthers have a top 35 rush defense in the entire country. Demetrius Hill and Donovan Manuel, they have over 60 tackles between the two of them. FIU is also coming fresh off a 14-point win over New Mexico State, where they held the Aggies to just 7 total points. Now, total-wise, 2 out of Florida International's last 3 did fall under the number. Meanwhile, Uconn saw their contest against Fresno and Central Connecticut this year fall under the total. I'm going to lean toward Florida International, plus 5.5, under 46 and a hook. Next ball game, UTEP, Louisiana Tech, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. La Tech's minus 4, totals 53.5. Despite being favored by 4, the Bulldogs of Louisiana Tech, they've given up a whole bunch of points in their losses this season. In their 3 losses this year, the Bulldogs allowed 46 points per game on average. And for the entire season, well, La Tech's giving up over 230 yards a game on the ground. They're facing a UTEP team who's played much better defense than them. The Miners are actually limiting their competition to just 188 yards a game passing. They've also gotten the W in 3 out of their last 4, and they're led by the duo of Jadrian Taylor and Cal Wallerstadt, who have 7 sacks between the two of them. Now, total-wise, both offenses have struggled this year. UTEP's 4-1 to the under for the entire season. I'm going to lean toward UTEP plus 4, under 53.5. Next matchup, it is going to be Clemson at BC, 7:30 p.m. East. Of course, when I say BC, that is Boston College. Now, it's Clemson who's minus 21, totals 48.5. Now, I think this is like a pretty easy letdown spot for the Tigers. They had 2 really tough wins in back-to-back weeks, and they failed to cover in both of their double-digit point spreads this year. Now, they're also having a tough time this season slowing down the pass. They're in the bottom 30 in the nation in pass defense. They're facing a Boston College team who won 2 out of their last 3. They averaged 36 points a game in those victories. Wide receiver Zay Flowers continues to flourish, even on a lackluster team. This guy's been good for a couple of years now. He's averaging nearly 100 yards a game receiving. He has 5 touchdowns. Meanwhile, linebacker Vinny De Palma. He has 43 tackles on the year. Now that's Italian. Now total-wise, BC saw their last 3 straight get over the number. Meanwhile, Clemson's 3-0 to the over in their last 3 themselves. I'm going to lean toward BC plus 21 and the over 48.5. Next ball game, Wazoo taking on USC, 7:30 p.m. East. Now, USC's minus 12.5, total 66. And guys, I got to tell you, I think that's a pretty big number for a conference game. The Trojans failed to cover in their last 2 straight, with both of those being against Pac-12 teams. When it comes to defensive play, the Trojans have had their issues slowing down the run. They're 85th in the country in rush defense. They're facing a Wazoo team who's been one of the better covering teams in the country. They're 4-0 against the spread in their last 4 straight. And they played some pretty solid defense during that span. And if you omit that Oregon game, the Cougs allowed only 10 points a game in their last 3 contests. Once again, if you get rid of that Oregon game. Now, this Cougar D has a staggering 18 sacks already. Dion Henley has 4 of those sacks, along with an interception and a team-best 44 tackles. Now, scoring-wise, Wazoo's 4-1 to the under for the entire season. Meanwhile, 2 out of USC's last 3 stayed under the total. I'm going to lean toward Washington State plus 12.5, under 66. Next game, South Carolina taking on Kentucky, 7:30 p.m. East. UK's minus 10.5, totals 49 and a hook. And even though the Kentucky Wildcats do have a stifling defense, they don't move the ball well enough to warrant this kind of number, a double-digit spread. They're in the bottom 15 in the country in rush yards per game. They're actually gaining just 94 yards a game on the ground. They're also coming fresh off a loss to Ole Miss, where they were held to 19 points. They're facing a South Carolina team who scored a whole lot of points in their last 2 games. Wideouts Antwain Wells and Jalen Brooks, they've also combined for over 120 yards a game receiving between the 2 of them. Now, total-wise, South Carolina saw unders against the likes of Georgia and Georgia State. Meanwhile, Kentucky's 4-1 to the under this year themselves. I'm going to lean toward South Carolina plus 10.5, keeping that one close. And the under, 49 and a hook. Next ball game, Army, Wake Forest, 7:30 p.m. East. Wake Forest minus 17.5, total 66. Now, the Deacs are 4-1 on the year, and they failed to cover only once during that stretch. Pretty good straight-up team and against the number. And even though these guys, well, I guess we praised them, and now we're going to shit on them. Is that true? Yeah. The Deacs are pretty good. They're a damn good team. Covered a bunch of point spreads as well. But even though these guys are slinging it all over the field, they've done very little to establish the run. They're actually 93rd in the nation in rush yards per contest, and that's the hill we're going to die on. They're facing an Army team who's scoring over 32 points a game, and they rush for more yards per game than all but one team in Division I. They're 2nd in the country in rush yards per game, only behind Air Force. The Black Knights are gaining over 300 yards a game on the ground. When it comes to the total, both teams saw 3 out of their last 4 get over the number. We're going to do it. We're going to pound Army, plus 17.5. Over 66. No, we're not pounding Army. I'll just let you know right there. That is not a premium selection. All right, next ball game should be a good one. I'm talking about BYU taking on Notre Dame, 7:30 Eastern start time. Notre Dame's minus 3.5, total 52. Now, the Irish failed to cover in 2 out of their last 3. And they really haven't been great offensively. Matter of fact, the Irish ranks 96th in the nation in passing yards per contest. They're facing a BYU team who's one of the better programs in the country in defending the pass. They're allowing only 175 yards a game through the air, which ranks in the top 20 in D1. Ben Bywater has a pair of interceptions, along with 34 tackles. Meanwhile, linebacker Max Tooley has 2 pick-sixes himself. When it comes to offensive production, the Cougs do like to throw it around a bit. They're in the top 25 in passing yards per game. Now, total-wise, the Cougs did see their contest against Baylor a few weeks ago fall under the number. Meanwhile, Notre Dame's 3-1 to the under in their last 4. I'm going to lean toward BYU plus 3.5, keeping that one close, under 52. Next matchup, Kansas State, Iowa State, 7:30 p.m. East. K-State's -3, totals 45. And as good as K-State's looked this year, to say that these guys are one-dimensional on offense is it's actually an understatement. They're throwing for just $139 per game, and they rank in the bottom 10 in the country in passing. They're also facing one of the toughest defenses in the country in Iowa State. These guys are allowing just 83 yards a game on the ground. And they rank in the top 10 in fewest yards allowed per contest. Orion Vance leads the team in tackles with 28 of them. He's also got 3 forced fumbles and 1.5 sacks. Meanwhile, offensively, wide receiver Xavier Hutchinson's been an absolute beast. He's averaging over 100 yards a game receiving and has 5 touchdowns. Probably a guy you're not going to hear a lot about because people don't think offense when they think of Iowa State, but Hutchinson's been great. Now, total-wise, we may see a few more points than expected in this one. The Cyclones did see 2 out of their last 3 get over the number. Meanwhile, K-State saw their last 2 straight get over the line. I'm going to lean toward Iowa State plus 3 over 45. Next matchup should be a snooze fest unless you love defense. I'm talking about Iowa taking on Illinois, 7:30 p.m. East. Illinois is the 4-point favorite, totals 35.5. And as good as the Illini have looked, I just really think the Hawkeyes on the other side have a better roster despite how bad they've been on offense. Now, Iowa did pick up wins this season against the likes of Rutgers and Nevada. They're also playing just as good of defense as Illinois is, if not better. The Hawkeyes are in the top 10 in fewest yards allowed. Jack Campbell has a team-best 49 tackles. Meanwhile, Cooper DeJean has 3 interceptions, 5 PDs, and a pick-6 from the secondary. Now, the Hawkeyes are facing an Illinois team who doesn't throw the ball all that well. They're 82nd in the country in passing yards. Illinois also lost to the likes of Indiana in their second game of the season. Now, total-wise, 3 out of the Illini's last 4 did fall under the line. Meanwhile, Iowa's 4-1 to the under in their last 5. I'm going to lean toward Iowa plus 4, under 35.5. Next game, Texas A&M taking on Alabama, 8 o'clock Eastern start time. I think this game was probably billed a little bit stronger in the offseason, but not so much now. Bama, 23.5-point favorite, total 52. The undefeated Tide's gone 4-1 against the spread thus far in the season. Finally getting the job done, covering the number. And when it comes to defensive play, well, you just can't move the ball on the Tide. These guys are giving up only 11 points a game. They rank in the top 5 in fewest yards allowed. Will Anderson has 5 sacks on the season, along with a pick-6. Meanwhile, Henry To'o and Jalen Moody, they have nearly 70 tackles between the two of them. And make no mistake, Bama can move the football offensively as well. They're scoring over 48 points a game, and they rank in the top 5 in total yards. They're facing a Texas A&M team who's having a tough time on offense themselves. These guys are in the bottom 30 in total yards per game. As a matter of fact, they've been held to 24 points or less in their last 3 straight. When it comes to the total, the Aggies' most recent outing this past Saturday against Mississippi State got 21 points over the number. Meanwhile, 2 out of Bama's last 3 got over the total. I'm going to lean toward Alabama minus 23.5, over 52. And with that, guys, we're going to take our next and final break of the video. Give me like a couple minutes. I'll be right back just to rest my ass and my vocal cords. All right. All right, guys, final segment. Let's go ahead and knock this thing out. Not sure why you haven't fast forward. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and get the job done. Oregon, Arizona, 8 o'clock East. Oregon's minus 12.5, total 71. Now, the Ducks are on a 4-game winning streak, and they failed to cover only once during that span. Oregon's got one of the more high-powered offenses in college football. They're averaging 41 points a game, and they're in the top 10 in rushing. Bucky Irving and Bo Nix, they've combined for over 600 yards rushing between the two of them. Meanwhile, defensively, the Ducks have done a nice job of slowing down the run themselves. They're giving up only 94 yards a game on the ground. Now, they're facing an Arizona defense who's really struggled this season. They're in the bottom 10 in the country in rush defense. They also failed to cover the point spread in 2 out of their last 4. I'm going to lean toward Oregon, minus 12.5, under 71. Next matchup, little ACC action. I'm talking about Florida State taking on NC State, 8 o'clock Eastern start time. The NC State Wolfpacks, minus 3 at home, totals 50.5. Now, it actually really feels like the Noles lost some momentum. They lost by double digits to Wake Forest. And they've also run into some slight defensive problems over the past few weeks. When it comes to stopping the run, Florida State's actually 78th in the country in rush defense. They're facing an NC State team who's 4-1 on the season themselves. And they allow only 94 yards a game on the ground. Drake Thomas and Tanner Engel, they've combined for nearly 60 tackles between the two of them. Now, the Wolfpacks allowing only 15 points a game, and they rank in the top 15 in the nation in fewest yards allowed. Now, total-wise, NC State saw 2 out of their last 4 fall under the number, throwing out that Clemson game. Meanwhile, Florida State saw 3 out of their last 5 fall under the total themselves. I'm going to lean toward NC State, minus 3, under 50.5. Next matchup I have for you, it is going to be Coastal Carolina taking on UL Monroe, 8 o'clock Eastern kickoff. Coastal's minus 13.5, total 58. Now, I'm not so sure that the Warhawks are going to be able to keep up with Coastal offensively in the long run. They may be able to keep it close in the first half, but UL Monroe, they really struggle moving the ball consistently. They're scoring just 20 points a game, and they rank in the bottom 20 in total yards per contest. So even if it's close in the first half, I just don't think they can consistently move the ball between the entire 60 minutes. When it comes to throwing the football, well, the Warhawks are throwing for under 170 yards a game. They're facing a Coastal Carolina team who does a nice job on offense themselves. They're scoring nearly 37 points a game, and they're led by quarterback Grayson McCall, who's thrown 14 touchdowns and just 1 interception. Now, when it comes to running the football, the Chants have a top 35 rush offense. When it comes to the total, 2 out of Coastal's last 3 ball games did get over the number. Meanwhile, UL Monroe, they saw 2 out of their last 3 get over the line. I'm going to lean toward Coastal, minus 13.5, the Chants, and the over 58. Next ball game, Fresno State taking on Boise, 9:45 East. Boise State's minus 6.5, total 46. Broncos got the W in 3 out of their last 4 ball games, and they've shown a lot of grit on defense. They're allowing only 134 yards a game passing, which ranks 2nd in college football. They're also allowing just 19 points a game, and they rank in the top 5 in fewest yards allowed per contest. DJ Schramm has 44 tackles on this season. Meanwhile, Zeke Noah has 2.5 sacks and a couple of forced fumbles. They're facing a Fresno team who's done little to establish the run game. These guys are currently in the bottom 30 in the country in rush yards per contest. They're also on a 3-game skid, which includes an outright loss to Uconn just last week. Now, total-wise, Fresno saw 3 out of their last 4 fall under the number. Not a lot of people have lost to Uconn over the past decade, I guess. Uconn stinks. Meanwhile, Boise saw 2 out of their last 3 fall under the total. Give me Boise minus 6.5, under 46. Next matchup, Hawaii, San Diego State, 10:30 p.m. East. Now, San Diego State's minus 19.5, totals 49. Before a team laying 19.5 points in the spot here, these guys, literally can't throw the football. And I'm talking about San Diego State. They're dead last in the nation in passing yards per game. They're throwing for just 65 yards per contest. That's worse than UMass, right? UMass is the second worst, I believe. Can't really remember. They're both horrible. And I'll tell you this much. These guys are the worst. San Diego State, 65 yards per contest through the air. They've also failed to cover in 4 out of their last 5. They're facing a Hawaii team, and I get it. Hawaii stinks. They're terrible. But they did cover the number in 2 out of their last 3, and that's all that matters when you're betting games, is who's covering. And I'll tell you what, the Rainbow Warriors, they've done a decent job slowing down the pass. They're actually allowing just 219 yards a game through the air. Now, they're led by Malik Hausman, who has 3 picks on the year, along with 13 tackles. When it comes to the number, both schools went 3-1 to the under in their last 4 outings. I got to imagine Hawaii can keep this one close. I don't think the Aztecs can score enough. Give me Hawaii plus 19.5, under 49. All right, next and final matchup for the video. It is going to be Oregon State taking on Stanford, 11 o'clock East. Oregon State's minus 7, totals 56.5. Now, it does feel like Oregon State's a lot better in this spot here. They're 4-1 against the spread overall for the year, and they're scoring over 33 points a game. Meanwhile, defensively, the Beavers are allowing only 205 yards a game passing. Keaton Oladapo has 31 tackles, 3 PDs, and a couple of sacks. Meanwhile, Jaden Grant and Rayshawn Wright, they have 4 interceptions between the 2 of them. They're facing a Stanford team who's on a 3-game skid. They failed to cover in all their ball games this year. This Cardinal defense has been horrible as they rank in the bottom 10 in stopping the run. Now, total-wise, both schools went 3-1 to the over in their last 4. I'm going to lean toward Oregon State minus 7, over 56.5. With that, guys, now it's time for our quick pick recap. I like SMU plus 3.5 under 64. Rutgers plus 3 under 50.5. Memphis minus 3 over 57.5. Nevada minus 3 under 44.5. UNLV plus 5.5 under 50. Michigan minus 21 under 57.5. Tennessee minus 3 over 61.5. TCU minus 6.5 over 67.5. Mississippi State minus 6.5 over 62. Missouri plus 10.5 under 56.5. Texas minus 6.5 under 65.5. Purdue plus 4 under 61. Louisville minus 4.5 under 51. Eastern Michigan plus 4 under 58. Bowling Green minus 2 over 55. Akron plus 11.5 over 59. Georgia Southern plus 2.5 over 65.5. Cincinnati minus 27.5 over 59. Georgia minus 29.5 under 50. Oklahoma State minus 10 over 63.5. UCLA plus 4 under 64.5. Liberty minus 24.5 under 51. Northwestern plus 9.5 under 43. Pitt Panthers minus 14 under 42.5. Tulane minus 2.5 under 54. Tulsa minus 5 under 46.5. Ball State plus 8.5 over 63. Toledo minus 5.5 over 58.5. Miami, Ohio plus 5.5 under 59. UAB minus 9.5 over 56. Ohio State minus 25.5 over 61. Ole Miss minus 18.5 over 60. Washington minus 14 over 57.5. Duke minus 2.5 under 53. North Carolina plus 3.5 over 66. Western Kentucky plus 6.5 over 70. Air Force minus 10.5 under 56. New Mexico plus 3 under 36.5. James Madison minus 10.5 over 56.5 points. Texas State plus 19 under 55.5. Troy minus 6.5 over 44. Florida International plus 5.5 under 46.5. UTEP plus 4 under 53.5. Boston College plus 21 over 48.5. Washington State plus 12.5 under 66. South Carolina plus 10.5 under 49.5 points. Army plus 17.5 over 66. BYU plus 3.5 under 52. Iowa State plus 3 over 45. Iowa Hawkeyes plus 4 under 35.5. Alabama minus 23.5 over 52. Oregon Ducks minus 12.5 under 71. NC State Wolfpack minus 3 under 50.5. Coastal Carolina minus 13.5 over 58. Boise State minus 6.5 under 46. Hawaii plus 19.5 under 49. With my next and final free pick for the video, I'm going to lean toward Oregon State minus 7 over 56.5. With that, guys, that's going to do it for me. Gotta thank you for joining me right here on YouTube. Really hope you enjoyed all this great free content, all this great free information. With that said, guys, happy week 6 to you. Best of luck to you. And I look forward to seeing you later on today on my website at patreon.com/BrockPage.